I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the 34th season of the New York Times Close Up. This week, we take a closer look at how the alliance between Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Assembly member Zohran Mamdani is reshaping New York's mayoral race and setting the stage for progressive politics across the country. But first, as New York City enters the crucial mayoral campaign, how will Jewish New Yorkers vote? The question defined by faith, identity, political conviction. It was explored by New York Times political reporter Nick Fandos. And joining me now is Ruth Messenger, the former Manhattan Borough president, distinguished advocate for social justice, currently serving as global ambassador for the American Jewish World Service. She, of course, was the Democratic mayoral nominee in 1997. Ruth, is there such a thing as the Jewish vote anymore?
No, I mean, that's true for almost any group. And I would say the Jewish community, which is huge and prominent in New York, but partly because of its size, partly because of its history, is itself a very complicated community. People study it forever. So there are different neighborhoods that are predominantly Jewish. There are different Jewish denominations, and there are different Jewish politics. Some of them influenced by the Middle East, but some of them just influenced by people's economic status. So no, there's no singular thing as the Jewish vote. There are Jewish organizations that encourage Jews to think about the range of issues that are concerned, that matter to the Jewish community. But we are a wonderfully fractious community. You know, there's a line that says, in any room, 2 Jews, 3 opinions.
Yes, indeed. The size of that vote has shrunk, obviously, demographically over the years. It's now, what, around 15% or so of the general election vote?
Yes, and you saw in the primary, some of the analyses from the primary, you saw clear evidence that Jewish voters voted in different ways for different reasons. And the most interesting thing was that some of the younger people who voted for Mamdani voted specifically for his position on Israel.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It is both a generational split and a foreign policy split, or a split about Israel. How does Mamdani reconcile those things as the front runner in this election?
You know, I think we've asked that question about every mayoral candidate. It's a hard city in which to be mayor precisely because of its amazing diversity, and it's a great city in which to be mayor because of its exciting potential. So you can't reconcile. But
Israel has never presented the same kind of contradictions that it seems to be this year.
Well, I think that's probably true, although I've said to a couple of reporters in the last few months, you know, I had lots of issues that people raised with me when I was running for mayor, fair, unfair. Nobody ever asked me my positions on the Middle East. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of assumed. Mamdani has done more because he has been articulate on that. He cares about Palestinian rights. There's a majority of people in Israel who care about Palestinian rights, and there's certainly a large number of Jews in New York who care about Palestinian rights.
When he talks about the river to the sea, when he talks about a global intifada, when he talks about arresting Netanyahu if he were mayor and Netanyahu were in New York, what about those positions?
Well,
is that, I don't want to say, is that going too far, but is it going too far politically, perhaps?
No, I think on some of them he's walked back a little bit. He's explained some of his uses of phrases, but he's focused right now, as Nick pointed out in the Times, on visiting with Jewish communities, and he's met with a very large number of Jewish community leaders, many of whom I don't know who, I don't have his schedule, but I know that he's met, as he has, Sam, with other groups. When you want to become mayor of New York, you know, I had those hopes once, and I spent a year literally meeting people that I didn't know, that I knew I didn't know. I remember spending a weekend with by invitation, with an Orthodox Jewish family, and I remember spending a weekend with a family of a police officer in Staten Island, saying, can I come and see what your life is like? So Mamdani has more experience with different groups, but he's pursuing that in the Jewish community, and he's finding what you and I just said. It's a diverse community with different points of view. On the issues, he's stepped back from a few. He's committed on some others. He is actually, I want to state, not running to be my Middle East ambassador.
Do you agree with him on his Middle East position?
I agree with some of his positions, but I actually have endorsed him enthusiastically, not spending a lot of time on where we exactly agree or disagree on that, because...
Especially since as mayor, he has virtually no influence.
Exactly, and I've lived a long time through a large number of mayors, as you have, and you know that it's not uncommon for a mayor in the city of New York to announce a position on something that he has actually no control or influence over. Mamdani may be a little more clear-cut on that, but he is running to be the mayor of a city that is in trouble. And by the way, as much as I adore New York City, the biggest challenge that Mamdani has, which is not really talked about enough, although I know he's aware of it, is federal government cuts. I mean, you read the newspaper every day, you see some bold initiatives. I see that both in the Northwest and in the Northeast, states are getting together to make their own vaccine policy. That's the kind of thing that he's going to have to figure out what to do with. What do we do if we lose federal aid for X or federal aid for Y? How do we as a city, in a state, nevertheless try to meet the needs, not only the ongoing needs of our population, but what Mamdani wants to do, which is the needs of a population in this city that has not been heard from enough.
Wouldn't an Andrew Cuomo, even a Curtis Sliwa, have a better relationship with the federal government than Mamdani, who's going to be used as a foil, as a socialist mayor of New York?
I don't think so, because I don't have any faith or trust in the federal government right now. So yes, they might claim by their connections or their private phone calls or by what we hear as Trump's desire to defeat Mamdani, which I don't think he can do, that he likes the other guys better. But for what? You think he's going to change his policies because somebody else is mayor? Mamdani, who I believe will be the mayor of the city of New York, is going to have to, among other things, figure out a way through the New York congressional delegation, which should be pretty strong with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. How can we continue to get some aid for a city of 9 million people that has lots and lots of physical infrastructure and social service needs?
We're talking before the weekend that obviously could be overtaken by events, but why have Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries not endorsed Mamdani yet?
You know, I really want to say, I have to ask them.
Yeah, but you know better than that.
Look, I mean, what are they worried? Maybe they're worried about some donor. Maybe they're worried about national implications. But I feel, as somebody who loved my time in government, that one of the things I learned is if you're part of a party, it's not a party system of government the way parliamentary governments are, but the party means something. And I find it just surprising, not answering your question, that two prominent leaders who we're very, very lucky to have in Congress have not endorsed the candidate who won the Democratic primary decisively. You know, if there had been some close margin, then you wanted to say, well, this guy won huge. And I want to say, I think I might have said this already, he didn't win because he's charismatic, although he is. He didn't win because he ran an amazing door-knocking campaign, although he did. He didn't win because he was clever in the use of social media, although he was. He won because he is talking to the issues that matter to a huge number of New Yorkers that don't get on Close-Up and don't get in the New York Times often enough, but are struggling to live here and stay in the city. And I want to, you know, I ran on improving public schools and public higher education. I think those are still issues for the future of the city of New York many, many decades later. But I want to see somebody who says, like, the problems of the cost of childcare and housing and transportation and healthcare are going to define whether or not we have a thriving New York in the future or not. I spend most of my time right now working with immigrants. We have so many fantastic opportunities to train the newest New Yorkers for jobs that are going wanting, and we do not have right now a city or state government that is invested in helping.
Given all these problems, why would anyone want to be mayor?
Because it's very attractive and powerful to think about what you might do, and what you might do in a way that potentially could set an example. Now, when I say that, I want to be careful. One of the things I've been impressed with Mamdani, and I don't know how much of his life he's been a student of this, but he knows more about other cities or countries where things are happening that he wants to emulate than anybody I've heard of in city government, and I was there for 20 years.
And admits that some places are doing it better than we do.
Exactly. And I was just, I'm happy to say, on vacation in Prague. And the first thing I discovered in Prague is that not only does it have a spectacular public transportation system, but I go free. 65 and over. You just get on the tram, you get on the bus, you get on the subway, you don't pay a dime.
How far can he go in wooing people who are skeptical about him without alienating his base?
I don't think his base will be alienated. I think most of his base, I mean, I hear all of the back and forth, but they understand that he's running for mayor, that he's going to represent a broad constituency. You assume when somebody gets into even an assembly office or city council office, well, they have a lot of people they have to answer to. Some of their positions will be moderated, but not all. Some they will hold true to their core. We'll see how he does that, but I don't think he alienates his base, and I do think he's working very hard on saying to communities and to people who may not know him, ask me some questions. Let's move on, but let me tell you who I am. Let me tell you how I see the city. Let me tell you what my focus is.
Can you be against Israel and not be anti-Semitic? How do you make a distinction?
Sam,
that seems to be the biggest problem.
You're much younger than I am, but you're of a generation of people who we spent a lot of our lives, I think I get to include you in this, fighting our government on some of its foreign policy. I spent them fighting the war in Vietnam and fighting for better civil rights. And we never doubted, I'm going to include you in this and some of your audience, I never doubted that I was a fierce, proud American who loved democracy and loved the right I had to oppose some of the things my government did. And in Israel, where I'm not a citizen, but where as a Jew I care about its future, I love the country, and I think its current leader is making mistakes, and I'm happy that I have a place, not on late night television, but a place to speak freely about what I think.
Is sanctions against Israel, the BDS campaign, arresting Netanyahu, are those proper actions?
I don't know, and let's see what he does with those positions, but again, you know, draw some picture for me and draw a circle and draw a tiny slice. Some of what he says or does on foreign policy, I bet you we hear him on other issues. I bet you we hear him on other global issues where we may or might not agree with him. But that's not what he's running to do. He's very smart. When he was in the assembly, one assemblyman, he was nevertheless trying to move the issue of free buses. He's now mayor with considerable power, although, as I said before, complicated relationship with the state, and I'm just being honest from my point of view, crazy relationship with the federal government. So there are lots of challenges. That's where his energies and his entire team is going to be focused.
Are we in sort of a post-racial, post-ethnic period that you look at formerly fairly solid blocks of voters, and they seem this time, based on the primary vote, based on what we're seeing now, to be split? There is no black vote or Jewish vote, if there ever was.
I think that's the question, is if there ever was. There was always something. This is a city that always has talked long before it became popular nationally about identity politics. Oh, that's a black neighborhood. Oh, I just remember in one year when I was in elected office, where we knew that East Harlem, we knew because we thought we're so smart, we knew that East Harlem was Puerto Rican. And then the census came. It just happened to be a year when there was a census, and it turned out that a vast portion of the Spanish population of East Harlem was Mexican. Who knew? I mean, we literally didn't know. So I think you just assume things. Any ethnic group or identity group that you name is likely to have diverse politics, and I think it was clear in some of the report on this election. And the main thing about this election, which is part of what I'm talking about, is that one of the most dramatic splits was age.
Yes, fascinating. Why, quickly?
Because, you know, I'm a proud mother of 3 extraordinary children. They all left New York. They left New York for lots of reasons. They live wonderfully in 3 other parts of the country. But one reason was it's terribly expensive to think about how you might function in New York City. And that was many years ago. My children made those decisions 30 years ago, yours also. I'm saying now, I do have grandchildren who are living in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is the place to live. But what I'm saying is there's a vast number of younger people who desperately want to stay in New York, whose job future is in New York, and they want to figure out how to do it. And the New York Times today, your wonderful newspaper, the day that we're taping this, had a great piece that said the Mamdani initiatives on childcare could be what the country needs, because a young family to function needs to have both adults working. And to have both adults working, you have to have affordable childcare, and it's like we don't get that.
Ruth Messenger, the former Manhattan Borough president, mayoral candidate in 1997. Thank you so much for joining us. And coming up next, the rapidly growing alliance between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Zohran Mamdani. This week, New York Times political reporter Matt Flegenheimer explored how the partnership between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Zohran Mamdani is now shaping New York City's mayoral race. Their alliance is drawing national attention, putting a spotlight on pressing issues, housing, homelessness, public safety. Matt, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much,
They are both democratic socialists. What is a democratic socialist?
It's a good question, and different people have different definitions of it. It's not a political party exactly. There is a Democratic Socialist of America as an organization. Interestingly, there's a very different relationship that each of them has to that group historically that's really shaped their relationships with the left broadly. I think there are some words that tend to be interchangeable in coverage that don't mean exactly the same thing. Progressive, democratic socialists, liberal is obviously part of the umbrella term that people use for the left.
Is socialist part of it?
There's a
I
distinction.
mean, Trump will say communist, which...
Trump will say communist, certainly not how they would self-identify. I think it's a lot of the things you said at the top. They would talk about a shared commitment to, income inequality, bridging those divides. The focus of this campaign, obviously, for Mamdani has been a lot about affordability, and a lot of the ways that AOC's campaign in 2018, her first race for the House, was sort of framed. A sort of outsider energy, often aimed at the establishment powers, even within their own party, among other Democrats. But there are some sort of distinctions in how they've operated within the confines of that broader
You've
Democratic
written in
Party.
the Times that they are, in fact, very different people, both in background, to some extent, in ideology, in terms of persona. How do they differ?
Part of it is the phases of their careers at various points, obviously. So, she's elected to the House in 2018. He's running a state Senate race at that point. As a campaign manager, that is. He runs for office for the Assembly in 2020. She has really been an ally to some establishment powers within the party since then. She endorses the Biden-Harris ticket last year, initially, and then, Harris, obviously, in the fall. In that primary, there was an uncommitted movement on the left to sort of withhold votes in protest of the administration's Middle East policies. Mamdani was behind that effort, was pushing that effort. So that's sort of a data point in how they were kind of negotiating the divides within the Democratic Party on an issue both of them care about. But from her vantage point, she's obviously in Congress, she's in Washington, he's an Assembly member. There's a different dynamic there as they sort of move through the political stages of being successful candidates coming out of New York. But she has certainly worked more within the system than he has, I think it's fair to say.
You quoted her as saying a couple of months ago that Mamdani she had expectations of what he was going to do. She made her expectations to him quite clear. What did she expect of him then and now?
I think that was really in reference to the team he would really need if elected, the expertise he would need around him if elected. And look, she understands better than most what it means to be elected to a position of high power
with
at
very
a very
little
young
experience.
age. Very little experience. And mayor of New York City is many orders of magnitude greater as far as the parameters of what you're overseeing than a single House member. So I think that was in reference to her sort of making clear to him and to his team that she wanted to see, not that they objected, she wanted to see him really surround himself with an experienced, deep roster of people who have a lot of history in New York City and a lot of expertise that obviously, by definition, he doesn't as a 33-year-old running for mayor.
She recommended that he take mental health walks. What does that mean? I guess it's good
clear your
for
head,
everybody.
wander around. Yeah, I've done them.
Okay. And
but
you seem in good shape.
I don't know. I'm not going to run for New York City mayor, but or for the House. But yeah, I think it was. There's a very short list of people who understand the experience. Not that they're identical, but the sort of equivalent experience of winning this sort of political earthquake of an upset in a primary that was not necessarily expected, becoming really overnight the subject and object of such national political fascination, becoming demonized in other quarters of the political conversation very quickly, having threats on your life, having different security considerations than you would have had before, not being able to really go anywhere. And I think that's something they've talked about in a way that very few other politicians in this moment can necessarily relate to.
We've written a number of times that some Republicans, perhaps even the president himself, would like Mamdani to win because then they could talk about the socialist mayor of New York City, use that as a foil. But you raised an interesting point in some of your articles saying that the Democratic socialists are a little concerned about him winning too because he's going to have to govern, and how he governs is going to be a real reflection on them. How valid is that concern?
I think they certainly broadly want him to win and to succeed. I think it was a recognition, a couple of the folks within DSA who I spoke to, that, and AOC I think feels the same way. She has said as much. His performance as mayor, if he is elected, will invariably reflect and be seen as sort of a referendum in some ways on the progressive movement broadly. There was a co-chair of the New York City DSA chapter said to me for this piece, his success will be our success, his failure will be our failure. She's aligned on that. I mean, there is a recognition that he has to succeed, not just for New York City, but for the movement broadly. And that, obviously there will be forces federally and otherwise who might view his mayoralty differently than his own base.
To succeed in getting elected, he's realized that he has to move a little bit, if not more, to the center. How far to the center can he move without alienating his socialist base?
It's been interesting. He really has not, with some exceptions, but he has not taken a ton of heat. Perhaps his people would disagree with this characterization. Relatively speaking, he certainly has not lost his base by any means with some of the gestures he's made, meeting with business leaders, meeting with Bloomberg.
They have nowhere else to go.
Backtracking slightly on a couple of remarks from his past, that sort of stuff that, you do in a general election. They have nowhere else to go. And also, Bill de Blasio for this piece, who I spoke to, said, maybe the left is maturing. Maybe there's, people have sort of collectively known on cue to just chill, was the word he used.
Well, chill, and can you get away with saying, I've grown, I've learned more, or is it craven, patronizing politics?
And I think, and this is a point that AOC has made to him in their conversations, I know as well, that voters understand the political realities of an election and will generally give you space to maneuver. When he's governing, that might be a different situation. Obviously, there are a lot of big promises he's made and a lot of expectations from his base and beyond, and the rubber will meet the road on that at some point.
I think I've covered something like 10 mayors during my career. What I've always found fascinating is that the voters seem to elect the right candidate at the right time. May not turn out to have been the best mayor, but it seemed to make sense when they were voting, almost like a jury. You had Lindsay coming after Wagner, the innovator, the young, charismatic leader. After that, people got a little tired of all the charisma and went to Abe Beame. After the city's brush with bankruptcy, they wanted a cheerleader in Ed Koch. After that, they wanted someone who could ease racial tensions, David Dinkins. After Dinkins and the Post headline, Dave, do something, they wanted Rudy Giuliani to do something. They wanted to perpetuate, after 9/11, that expertise with a Mike Bloomberg. Then they said, what about liberals again with de Blasio? And then crime with Eric Adams. What does that say about Mamdani? What is it voters are looking for then?
That's interesting. I do think the context of the primary and having Cuomo as the sort of consensus establishment choice.
And his to lose in the primary.
And his to lose. And I think the combination whether Mamdani is a reaction in the same way to Adams that a lot of the successor mayors were in that chronology, I think there is certainly, I mean, it was the case that his campaign made, a notion that the old way hasn't been sufficient, and the sort of clubby establishment politics, to use their framing, of the Adams era, of the Cuomo era, was not going to cut it in this political moment. I do think there was this sort of generational change and kind of visceral attitudinal change that they were trying to tap into.
A generational change, and anecdotally, more people in a older generation either being persuaded to take a chance on Mamdani or not vote for the other candidates, which would suggest it's his to lose now.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a primary that he won pretty handily, and anecdotally, I think both of us have encountered people who might not have been with him in the spring and summer who are going to, whether they're holding their nose or not, probably vote for him as a Democrat in the fall. We'll see. There's a lot of race to be run still.
Matt, you wrote recently that how Eric Adams lost New York. How did that happen? Did he ever have New York and lose it? And why did he lose it?
He certainly had the job of his dreams, which he doesn't seem likely to have after November.
Right.
I think he obviously was elected, as you said earlier, with a lot of wind at his back, with a public that was still sort of reeling from COVID, the financial after effects of that, the sort of psychic citywide after effects of that, the trauma of that, and he tapped into a sense in a sort of combination of like New York City cheerleader and law and order, but still sort of police advocate in his past, kind of fusing those elements together, which felt like a fit for the moment to enough of the electorate in 2021. The combination of scandal and a general sense that he hadn't necessarily fulfilled all of that promise. Obviously, voters have had their say. Actually, I shouldn't say that. He was not on the ballot in the spring or summer. But he was, fending off various investigations and having his interactions with people in Trump's world. And I think voters have certainly gotten wind of that broadly in these last months.
That's it for this edition of the New York Times Close Up. Thanks to Matt Flegenheimer, political reporter of the New York Times. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. Don't forget to download the CUNY TV app. You can catch our weekly program on the go, anytime, anywhere.